Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to tonight's podcast. Got a little bit of feedback there, but we'll be all right. We are joined by three wonderful guests on tonight's episode, which we're calling Medic. We're explaining the whole using healing in game. So we have a physical trauma expert, a mental trauma expert, and a fantastic writer joining us tonight. So we're going to go in that order. So starting in the corner with Trauma Tribe, go ahead and give us an introduction. Maybe, perhaps. Miss Garrett. Catherine, can you hear us? You're muted. All right. Well, we'll move on until she can hear us. I don't know what's going on here. So, Miss Parker, introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Cheryl Parker, and I'm the owner of Adapt DNA. And I have kind of a two-sided business. On one side, I help people walk through their grief process when they're dealing with loss, all kinds of losses, but I specialize in helping women who are have just lost a spouse. So professional, successful women in the workplace trying to find their footing, trying to still focus at work while they learn to live again. And on the other side of my business, I also teach mental health strategies. So I go into corporations and I teach them some self care strategies and mental health strategies and adaptability and just creating community in the workplace to support each other through whatever that group happens to be dealing with. So that's a little bit about what I do.
Fantastic. Any fun plugs or any things you want to shout out, like your website or things like that, before we get too far into it?
Sure. Sure. The website is adaptdna.com. And there's a free download on there. Anybody that's dealing with loss, any sorts of loss, there's a free download called the 7 Stepping Stones to Reclaiming Your Life After Loss. If you just kind of want to dip your toe into a bit of healing. And my book, My Good Grief Healing from Loss, is also available on Amazon. Shameless plug.
No shame in it, promise. Speaking of books, we're going to move on to the other author in the room.
Hi, everyone. So I am primarily a fantasy author, and let's see, I'm from Canada and British Columbia. In terms of what I plan to do as time goes on in my career, I'm actually kind of pressing pause on writing right now because after my current book, Black Rose Cocoon, comes out, I have a really big new fantasy project I've been meaning to do for years, but because I wasn't practiced yet, I just didn't bother with it. I wrote the series Boone and Shack, which has 5 books. I consider that my big practice round for what I wanted to do once consider myself good. Black Rose Cocoon is my first independent novel, which revolves around a female killer in the late 80s, and we focus on 4 characters that are somehow connected in different ways to this killer. So, current books, meaning the whole Boone and Shack series, is available on Amazon as a Kindle and paperback.
Fantastic. Any other places they can find your websites or anything like that yet?
Same handle for all of it, HG Flitcher, for Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and newly done is on Spotify. I have a new podcast called Life as Stories with AG Flitcher, which I started 3 weeks ago.
I was gonna say I listened to one of those this week, and it was Beauty and Death. Is that what the title was?
Death is beautiful.
I was close. Dang it. It was a good episode.
Did you like it?
I did. It was good. All
Thank
right.
you.
before we get into the fun stuff, one more time over at Catherine.
So sorry about that. My name's Catherine Garrett. I'm a podcast host of the podcast called Birth Trauma Stories. I'm a perinatal trauma survivor myself. A couple years ago, I had an amniotic fluid embolism, which left me disabled. And my website is www.birthtraumastories.com. You can find me on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Birth Trauma Stories.
Fantastic, easy peasy lemon squeezy. All right, so we're gonna push forward here a little bit. So tonight's topic, we're gonna talk about the healing mechanics in game, right? So generally on this podcast, we don't get into the nitty gritty of using what spells to use or what potions to find or whatever, because we deal with a lot of systems, right? So this is more of how do you narratively play with injury, and how do you make things feel real for your players while keeping them in a safe space mentally, right? Because you don't want to push things too far to where people just get engrossed in the gross, and have to step away or take a large break or something like that, right? So a lot of this is going to be figuring out what people's lines are, and that varies from person to person. I mean, a lot of this is going to be like at your own table, at your own discretion. Um, but for setting scenes and stuff like that, I'm going to ask you all individually, so don't feel afraid that you're going to miss this. But who should I start with? Let's start with Miss Parker again. Miss Parker,
Okay.
how would you describe a simple injury?
Simple injury.
Yes. What is an injury you would consider simple?
Well, I actually am dealing with a simple injury right now. It's painful, but it's simple. Tearing a muscle
Okay.
is a simple injury. It causes some pain, but it still lets you function in life and carry on. Is that what you're kind of looking for?
Sure. That's a good
Yeah.
descriptor. All right. I'm going to jump it over
Okay.
to the next person and keep moving along. All right. Catherine.
I think I would piggyback off of what Miss Parker said. Maybe something like also a broken bone, pulled muscle. Maybe if you need some stitches, you go get fixed up, but really no long term, like more than several weeks or maybe a couple months of recovery.
Several weeks, couple months of recovery. That's a serious injury in my book. But all right, we'll get back to that.
I think my perspective has changed.
Okay. I mean,
Take that with a grain of salt. Like my perspective has definitely changed
okay.
after what I've been through.
Okay, I mean we'll get back to that because that's important because again we go back into your tables, your discretion. Some people are going to have a much different experience than other people.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
AG, what's
Yeah.
your description of a simple injury?
Well, with my 20 plus years of doing martial arts, as long as you can walk after, you're good. So as long as they're still breathing, you're not like because one time I had two fractured ribs from getting kicked a little too hard, and several times, and I had to go back to my job at that time, which was to bust tables. So I'm lifting a freaking 20-pound platter over my head, and I have my floating ribs pushing in on my lungs, and they're broken. So I'm just going. But eventually it was fine. But yeah, just it's as long as you can push through the pain, that's more temporary. It's just an annoyance. Then you're good.
Okay, I had to disagree with all three of you on this one. A simple injury is like something you can put a band-aid on. Stops bleeding in a
Oh,
couple minutes. Holy cow! Y'all over here like, yeah, broken bones are nothing.
I still got blood in me.
we're intense.
You're killing me, y'all. No, that's
Apparently.
that's good though. But that's a great example, right?
Yeah.
All three of you were kind of on the same track, and I'm over here like, no, simple injury. I cut myself and put a band-aid on it. It'll heal eventually, sure. So let's go. Now I gotta ask, what's a serious injury? Like, what do you guys consider serious? We're gonna start with AG and go backwards this time.
Okay. Um, I would say a serious injury is when you have no conscious control of what happened to you. So if you end up in a coma, or you have such a severe injury that you can't really comprehend what's happening around you, that to me is a serious injury where you have no control. Is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, all right. That's a simple description. I like that. Is a serious injury is something you can't control at all. Okay, Miss Parker.
Well, I would say a concussion that leaves you with limitations that are unrecoverable.
Okay, that's fair. Miss Garrett.
Ooh, I think that maybe a little of both. Like, definitely, I've had a concussion before too, and that left me kind of not the same for 6 months to 9 months. Um, and eventually, I did get better. So maybe somewhere in the middle.
Okay, so not quite.
Definitely including what AG said of, you're in a coma, you're not aware of what's happening around you, etc.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think we can all agree that the serious injury is something that like takes you away from your own body, right? Takes some of your body autonomy away from you because of it, right? In some form or another. Um, so I mean, with that, when you're describing this to people, how do you describe that to someone effectively, right? Because you don't want to spend 10 hours trying to describe a feeling. How do you describe it simply to people? And anyone can jump in here. This is
So I actually took a training on how to share my story well, and
okay.
they use this idea called an elevator pitch, and you have 2 minutes to pitch your story. Now, how do you do it in those 2 minutes?
All right.
It's
I've only heard
and they
elevators
literally
pitches
have you
for
yeah,
business stuff,
they
but go ahead.
literally have you write out your elevator pitch in the training, and like it was really helpful.
Okay. Do you think it would be helpful for narrative purposes to do something similar when you're trying to describe something strenuous or serious for people?
I think it depends on your audience. I mean,
Okay.
is this, someone who you have a history with? Is there someone who's going to be in your life for a while? Because it's you know, someone you just come across literally last night, maybe don't go into all the gory details.
That's fair. That's fair.
For me, one of the methods I use for writing in terms of pacing, especially when I'm trying to understand where do I want my character to be in the present moment, meaning what energy will I choose for them to be in, and I'm not just them, but the environment around them, because even if you have a serious injury or you put that into your storytelling, you also have to understand that there's live elements happening all around this person. Now, it's your choice of how lively you want those elements to be. So, say they're in a deserted, apocalyptic area. If they're fine, then it's a matter of what resources do they have to get to the last or the closest bit of civilization where they could ask someone for help. But if it's the opposite, where there's fire and everything happening all around them, and it's just super chaotic, it's a matter of what are their abilities and their focus and energy at that time to be able to push forward, or do you have them regress because of whatever event that happened previous to that? That's that's stopping their motivation to progress themselves forward.
Okay. Interesting. Joe, you look like you had input on that. What do you got?
Yeah, well, I was intrigued by your answer, because I was thinking along the same lines. It's like, where do you want to take the person that's listening to this story? It's like, what's the intention? Like, where do you want to take them? Like, is it you want to inspire them? Then I'm going to talk about all the positives and how I've overcome something. If I want to like lovingly disrupt them so that they really get the seriousness, then I'm going to concentrate on the impact that the injury has had on me. That make sense?
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
think about Goblet of Fire for Harry Potter. In the movie adaptation, when there's the maze scene, Harry Potter is supposed to have a broken ankle, like in the book. But in the movie, they decide to just have him run around like he's fine. And of course, for a bunch of reasons, they cut a bunch of creatures out of it. So to me, the movie industry likes to water down things because they think a character can't be too injured, because if they're too injured, then it becomes harder to film it, and the story becomes um, harder to understand for a simple audience. Where writers prefer to have it be more gripping and increase the level of stakes to make it more palatable, to make it more intriguing. Because when you put someone in true peril, then it's a matter of how much pure will do they have, not how injured are they, but how much motivation do they have to look past that pain. And it's just the same as being a human being. How hard are you willing to test your own spirit despite the severity of whatever injury or even emotional trauma that you're going through?
Now, you kind of touch on it at the end there. Emotional trauma and physical trauma are deeply intertwined. Would you guys agree?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, speaking on that, where do you guys fall under your desire to explain that to other people? Like, what, how do you guys fuse your connections when you're explaining those two concepts? Because sometimes a cut to the wrist that leads to infection might not be detrimental or a serious injury, but how they got the injury might be considerably more traumatic, right? Something simple that could be super terrible, or something super terrible was just like, it just happened. There's no traumatic event because I just experienced it. I didn't have much time to react to it. Um, how do you guys intertwine or decombine, for the two of you that kind of work more on the recovery aspect of it? How do you guys deal with that?
Well, I know for me, being a grief expert, it all boils down to grief. So I quite often take concepts like in a corporate setting, dealing with stress and dealing with the adversity in your jobs. I can kind of intertwine it with grief. For example, I went into a large organization recently. They had just returned back to the workplace after COVID. They were all working from home and they pivoted. Then they come back to work and they were all struggling with their mental health. And so I went in and I explained how grief plays a role in this and how, their routines have been disrupted. So any loss, any disruption in your life can be relatable back to grief. So I'm always kind of intertwining mental health and grief and anything that you're dealing with. Like when I was dealing with my concussion, it was like loss of routine, loss of income because I was off work, loss of executive function, loss of my social life because I had to stay at home and I couldn't drive. Like so there's just so many losses wrapped up in a circumstance.
Gotcha. Okay. Miss Garrett, you got anything to add to that, or any opinions
Yeah,
on
I
your own?
mean, my experience has been a lot of grief. I mean, I walked in to have a baby and then I'm being wheeled out in a wheelchair. And I know like a lot of new moms are wheeled out, but I've had to use accessibility devices for 4.5 years now. And that's I'll say it, it's weird. It is. It's weird. But we take it one day at a time. And as far as how I share that on my podcast, I'm pretty much an open book because that's my quote unquote safe space. In my everyday life, I have more filters, because there's studies that show when you share your story to empathetic listeners, your brain chemistry actually changes to the way your brain views that event. But the opposite can happen too. So you do have to be careful on who you share with and how much. But Cheryl, what you're saying totally makes sense. I mean, even just with the disruption of COVID, like that was a massive trauma to so many people.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Okay. Well, so going back to the first bit of that question, right? How do you decouple or recouple those two thoughts and opinions? Obviously, I think we got the coupling down. They link really easily, but how do we disengage the traumatic part from the physical part? Is there a way to do that simply, in your guys' opinion?
I think it's a matter of how you react to your past.
Okay.
Meaning, yes, the event's over. Now it's more like, well, what's left is you. It's your reaction, your current emotional state, your current physical state, and how can you separate um the stored energy from that event and into your current being? Because I actually talked to a trauma expert when I was working on the last book of Boone and Jack, and she was talking about self traps, which is where if you suppress emotion for a long time and it starts to create self traps, meaning vices that you use to cope with this pain that you haven't actually outwardly dealt with it. And part of that is not being able to separate your emotional pain to your physical pain. So, for example, for me, for the first 4 years after my mom passed away, um, I had like acid reflux for 2 months around the anniversary of her passing because I had never actually fully dealt with the grieving process. So my body was literally rejecting and fighting the stored energy that I was not releasing. So when it comes to incorporating that into to storytelling in order to separate them, really it's about separating the person from their mental health status that can tie into how they toxify their physical being. So it's just a matter of being able to just get it out of your system, however, whatever method you want to use, and also understand that it's not about avoiding the negative feeling, but working through it so that you deal with it as soon as you are able to, and then the recovery comes afterwards.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense. Sorry, go ahead.
no, go.
I was going to say that my 8-year-old daughter died years ago, and I was able to donate her organs. And at the time, Don Cherry and Mike Harris were putting together the Trillium Gift of Life organization. And when they found out that Rachel, 5 weeks before, I was reading a newspaper article about a little boy who had undergone a lung transplant. And she's peeking over my shoulder. She's asking me questions, and I told her about it. And she said, "Well, when I die, I want to donate my organs." And so 5 weeks later, when she was at the kids' hospital and pronounced brain dead from a condition called ITP, the doctor said, "Have you considered organ donation?" And I said, "No, but she had." And I mean, their mouths dropped, but they were amazed. And at the time, that was what they were trying to advocate was people sharing their wishes around organ donation. So Rachel became a bit of a poster child, and I did a lot of public speaking. And I was in the acute stages of my grief. But like you were saying, is like to be able to separate and share the story, um, knowing that, what I learned was like I could take a tragedy and I could inspire people. And that was so, so powerful. So I would kind of park my grief at the door. I would share the story and then I'd go home and I'd be like flat out for 2 days. So I did find a way to decouple my emotions and my grief so that I could share the story and make a difference. And that ultimately led me to doing my grief work. So it was a very powerful exercise.
Any follow-ups to that? Oh, all right. Well, thank you, I guess, is the appropriate bit to that part of the story. Um, obviously, they were able to change someone's lives, not to include your own. And that's probably one of the most important things, especially for the next bit of this podcast, which is going to talk more about the healing side of things, right? We've talked about what an injury is and the bad things that come with it. Now we get to talk about the improvements that can come from it, or the changes, right? Um, expert in the room over here, someone who's been went and walking, came out in a wheelchair. What are some of the ways that you found have kind of come past that in a positive light, or have you?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, first and foremost is my faith in Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. It's, you know, the when my world feels like it's, well, the world is literally spinning, but metaphorically too, when, my world feels like it's unraveling, that's the basis that I go back to every single day. Um, More important, another huge aspect is my family. My husband's incredible. Like, you can imagine what this has been like for him, watching his wife code in front of him multiple times is not what you sign up for when you get married, but it happened, and he has taken it one day at a time. And he's just, like I said, incredible. um, I also think AJ was talking about about a month or two before the anniversary of his mom's death, he would get physical symptoms. I I too, um, don't necessarily get physical symptoms around the anniversary, but take time to reflect back, because when I first woke up, I couldn't sit up, I couldn't stand from a chair, I couldn't even read a clock. Like, I had a stroke as well, and so my cognitive functions were very depleted. And so it really helps me personally to look back at pictures and videos and um, books, cards, letters from well wishers. Um, that's what works for me personally. I know everyone's different and what works for them, and I think the most important thing is you have to find what works for you.
Okay, so again, to wrap this in the perspective of a character in a story or a character at a table, when they're going through their physical or mental healing process, the finding the process that works for them is probably the most appropriate way to phrase it, right? We can make fun of them chugging a potion and their bones magically snapping back together and their cuts and bruises healing, but that in itself has got to be a situation, right? Because feeling better doesn't always mean you feel better, right? You can heal from an injury and there still be pain, even if there's no outward signs. Excuse me, sorry. Um, so with that, what are some other positive uh, effects of the healing process that you guys have gone through? I'm going to go back to AG for a little bit to give him some time to talk about. But like in your books and in your characters, have they ever had like a healing moment or something that along those lines?
Yeah, so in book 3, called Saddleton Haunting, um, there's a scene where they're in the middle of a forest, Boom, Jack, and Shammy. Um, and it's kind of like the lull of the story where they're kind of gathering information where to go next for their adventure. And it's not just, sitting down and enjoying your little break from hell. um, it's more like the thing I noticed over time when it comes to when you're going through something is there are moments where you are just breathing. And that's what I incorporate into my writing, where I can't have my characters running on fire the whole time, because then there's no payoff to their maturity. And even if they're a grown adult, there's obviously going to be some kind of growth. There's no growth if there's no breath. That's crazy. if to obligate your characters to just keep going, they're gonna stop eventually, and it's not gonna be towards the end. It's a matter of asking yourself, when do I want my character to stop and think? And when they do stop, how are they thinking? Because not everyone reflects on um, their events or mistakes in the same way, and that's where we get to see really who the character is. Because anyone can look at animators. And an animator can obligate a character to move, but a writer can only um, write a text block of what that is. So you have to really play on psychology to really echo what we do physically, and of course what we do internally, how we think. How do you externalize that emotion? Well, it's a matter of how do they externalize their how much of themselves do they want to externalize towards others, meaning other characters, and what level of intimacy do I want to create in terms of the environment in that scene. So it's a matter of what is the proximity to each character, um, what kind of chemistry do I want them to have, and how does the environment around them um, play to their strengths and weaknesses, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. So outward expression. That's a super interesting segue for that one, because a lot of healing is viewed through your external expression, right? When doctors ask you how they're feeling, they don't know until you tell them. You can have your arms sticking in an oddward angle, and they're still going to be like, they might be a 4, they could be a 10. I don't really know. Until you externally tell them, hey, this is how I'm feeling, they're gonna have a hard time, right? But that's the same for stories and characters, right? Your character could be having a deep traumatic moment or a physically painful instance, uh, but the viewers or the readers or the players won't know unless you externally express those bits and feelings, right? As someone who's telling the story as a whole, or the players that are participating in stuff and things, the external projection of how you are feeling, and it could be internal monologue, right? It doesn't have to be external, especially if it's for readers or people that are listening along. They don't have to have that outward. They're still being a badass, but on the inside they're crying because shark ate their puppy and they're not feeling good about it. Um, but kind of on that, like, how important is the external expression for the healing process? Like, how important is it to say, this is where I'm at, right? This is what happened to me. This is how it feels to me. What do you guys think on that one? How important is that?
To me, it's about the author's choice of, do I want this character to be alone or not, and do they express their themselves out loud by themselves or with other people. Like, take again take Harry Potter for example. As the series progresses, Harry becomes more and more isolated because more tension is on him in the negative sense, and therefore he becomes more agitated and very teen angst, but also feels extremely alone, and he starts to express himself with anger because he doesn't feel like he has anyone he can trust. So he has no choice, especially in his development, but to express that frustration. So, say you're writing nonfiction for the other end of the spectrum, there's still the story element that has to be played in there, where you have to tell the audience why this event in particular at this point of time really triggered this person into being who they were at that time, and what does it tell us about them, and who is writing this nonfiction book? Is it someone who knows this person personally, or is it something political where they're just being an outsider and trying to kind of understand what that person might have been feeling at that time based on whatever they did?
Interesting thoughts. Miss Parker?
Yeah, I am a big advocate of expressing while you're going through the healing. Now, that doesn't have to be verbally, it doesn't have to be in front of an audience, it doesn't even have to be a person, even if it's journaling or sitting quietly in silence. But somehow to get your emotions expressed, I think, is very critical in the healing. I think no two people will do it the same, and no two people will do it on the same timeline. But I think that expressing it is a very, very big part of the healing process. And I think that we need to allow ourselves to give ourselves permission to grieve and to allow all of it. I just really believe like people need to be free to be real, because society certainly isn't going to give us permission to heal. So I think that it's when you think about books and stuff, it's like you can take your character anywhere, and it wouldn't be unusual for a character to stuff it because that's certainly an acceptable way to kind of carry on in society and just muscle through. But if you are going to, my cat's jumping up here. But if you are going to develop your character and you're going to have your character have that um, situation or experience grow that character or mature that character or have that person wake up and be enlightened by this experience, then for sure I think having those feelings expressed is definitely going to be part of that.
Okay. Last but not least, over in the what are your thoughts on this?
Sorry, did you call me?
Yes, you. Sorry, on my screen you're the last one in line. So
That's okay. I mean, I agree with what everyone else said. I mean, I agree. You have to find what works for your character. You have to find what works for you. You have to find where you want to take the story as well. That's you have to have kind of a vision. And in relation to my life, I've kind of had to figure out like what direction do I want to take my life in. And a lot of that has been talking it out, journaling, and I think it does mature a person. I've heard it said before that um, the hardships that you go through will be someone else's survival guide. And that sense of community, whether that's in storytelling or like with my podcast, I have the Trauma Tribe. We do a virtual support group, and that's the community we've found. But that's such an important piece of, in my opinion, that's such an important piece of the healing. And if you're an introvert and don't want to share your story with anyone else, that's okay too. You can find your community in a journal.
I was gonna say, I mean, for those that have a hard time expressing those things externally, right? Because again, going back to as characters, there's lots of times where you want to be Billy Badass, but you're still playing a person. They still have feelings. They still have whatnot. So what is a good way for those kind of people or characters to express themselves? You said journaling, so I think that's a good way. Do you guys have other thoughts or opinions on how to express that via either real life or in story?
Can I jump in real quick
Of
too?
course.
I think like with something that millions of people around the world do every single year, having a baby, it's really it can add layers of grief when it doesn't go to plan, so to speak, or it doesn't go the way you thought it would. And so I think enveloping yourself in a world that is not necessarily your real life or your real world can promote healing as well.
Oh yeah, don't I'll get started on the benefits of playing games and getting past your trauma that way, but I'm saving that for the last 10 minutes. So the next
Oh,
section.
okay. Sorry, I jumped ahead a little
No,
too
you're
quick.
good. You're good. Segues are great. We're heading in the right directions. All that means. Um, all right, Miss Parker. What about you? Do you have
Yeah,
additions
well,
or
I mean, it can be expressed anyway, right? Like you can have your character being badass and acting out, and that can be an expression of, something that you're going through, or drinking excessively, or anything excessively, working out, beating up people, like whatever. So, yeah, it can be a lot of different expressions.
okay. AG, anything to add?
Um, See, to me, expression in terms of the pacing and progression of storytelling, it's not that simple for me in terms of how I want the story to progress and how I want the character to express themselves. Because it's a matter of not how much I want to hold the character back, but when I want them to play a certain energy. Because their energy is tied or tethered, really, to the environment around them that I am manipulating to extricate whatever kind of step I want them to take to move the story in a certain way. So, say I've put them through peril and there's a quiet moment. I have to decide, do I take them away from their comfort zone, or do I cocoon them into a small space where they're isolated and it's dark, and now it's kind of like they're in a quiet box, and now they have to ask themselves, how much anxiety do I have, and how do I act in a moment of anxiety? Because if they naturally, like me, have severe anxiety, um, and they've basically exhausted themselves physically, all they have left is their mind. And I ask myself, well, how do I want their mind to play with or against them? So it goes for any form of storytelling, whether it's a game or just a book or a movie or a series, whatever it is. It's your choice as an author to decide. I want to punish this character, or I want to reward this character for having gone through this. So, say um, you're playing D&D, and there's the dungeon master. It's their choice to decide when to put the fire out based on your role. Um, and then if you are writing a fiction novel, it's that's a bit more it's a bit more difficult because you have to really pay attention to every nuance of the story, so you see what is your idea of reward and punishment for each character, and how do you want the world to control them, and how do you want them to control the world around them, and vice versa.
Nice. Okay. So I want to ping off something you said there. Rewarding yourself, right? Or how you reward your characters. Um, in your guys' experiences, have you had the positive rewards be the majority of what you've gotten for working through these experiences that you had, or has it just been way more negatives that way the positives? Where are your guys' heads at in that space?
For a reward.
For reward or punishment. You know what I mean? When you work your way through the healing process, right? As you said, the author gets to pick whether they're rewarded or punished for going through that experience. As a personal question to you guys, and feel free if you want to avoid this question, you don't have to answer it. But where do you feel like you fit on that scale?
I think it depends on who's in their environment. If there's no one in their environment that wants to provide them the reward,
Right.
then they
No, no.
go seek.
But you and your stuff.
Oh, you mean me?
Yeah.
Oh, I won't talk about myself. No, I was just joking. Um, well, I mean, it's kind of the same answer. Um, I like seeking the reward myself because it's my it's in my choice and it's in my control instead of someone's idea of a reward for me. Um, because they only have some idea of who I am. Like, people like to say, "Oh, I'm very honest with my partner." It's like, yes, but we all have things like that very small nugget of things that we keep to ourselves. So sometimes we reward ourselves because we know ourselves better than anyone, and therefore we know what exactly that version of a reward means to us. Now, the opposite, punishment, is something that I've found that we tend as human beings to do more easily than reward, not because we hate ourselves, but because it's easier to embrace pain than to work through pain and then find the reward after. So, whenever I've been in pain, there are times where I'm staying in it too long. But then I take a step back as I've gotten older. I've realized what I'm doing to myself, and that's where I find the reward of, oh, I'm staying in this moment a little too long. Why? And then I find the answer, and then I find the reward, and then I just carry on.
Solid philosophy, to say the least. Miss Parker, what about you in your current personal journey? Where do you think you're at on the scale there?
Yeah, well, I think initially, especially after Rachel died, I felt like I was very comfortable with the punishment, being in the sadness, being in the acute stages of grief. But I also was very aware that I was going to be the author, and it was up to me to write my story, and I definitely chose reward. And I have so often said I would not wish the death of a child on anyone, but I would not trade the lessons for anything on what I learned and who I've become from the experience. So definitely I weigh heavy on the rewards.
Miss Garrett.
I actually used to be an animal trainer, so I'm a huge advocate for positive reinforcement, and that's kind of a reward base.
100%.
And yeah, that's yeah, definitely a huge advocate for rewards. And um, piggyback off of what AG said, I think we punish ourselves because we tend to be our own worst critic, which I think is a flaw of the human race as a whole, because our loved ones around us typically aren't as hard on us. But yeah, I think we tend to be our own worst critic. But I definitely, even like in achieving like rehab goals, I'll, I don't know, buy myself a coffee or go get my hair done, or something like that.
Those are fantastic rewards, especially when it's good coffee. But you know what else would be a good reward? A cool, shiny sword. Like we do in our silly tabletop role playing games, right? How's that for a segue? Um, Mr. Daggerhouse here was kind enough to add something to the discussion here to kind of pop into our last topic. He says you can use games to try various solutions to the trauma, or expressing the trauma, or working through the trauma that doesn't necessarily have to have a real life cost, which is a huge advocate point that we have as a company and as a group, and why we think these silly games are so important for people. First time we kind of thought about this was we had a really good session with someone dealing with their in-game father, just jerk of a character the entire time. And to clarify, I'd never met this man's father in my life, but apparently I did a really good job and just nailed the character, right? He got an entire session's worth of working through that trauma with his dad that he didn't get to, right? Got to metaphorically punch the dude in the face. I don't think he actually came to blows in the game, but there was discussion and all this other stuff that was wrapped up into it. That like was me. I just acted, having a great time. He was living through an event. Um, and his reward at the end of that was like catharsis, right? He got to say the things he didn't get to say because at that point his father had passed on quite some time ago, right? We had missed that opportunity to be an adult saying the things he needed to say to the people he wanted to say it to. Um, and all kinds of TTRPGs, D&D, big popular one, right? But if you want to run around in space as an alien or run around modern time as an office worker or something, so whatever fun game you're playing, right? You can have those situations in a safe place where you're not going to hurt yourself, right? Uh, real life cost is a wonderful adjective to throw onto it, right? Because it is just the real life cost is your time. You're gonna sit down for 4 hours to do these things, right? As a joke, we like to call our stuff like cheap therapy, because that's what it is. You get to roll dice and run through these scenarios. But dealing with death and tragedy in a safer scale is way easier to mend those wounds that we don't even realize we're carrying around. You get to sit back and go through your grieving processes, and sometimes it's over like a pet seagull. Our mascot is a great example. When we killed the seagull for the first time in the last group, the entire group freaked out because that was the personification of all of their childhood pets in one character. Was it anything more than a seagull wearing armor? No, that's all Squawk was, seagull wearing armor. But the amount of effort and things that they got to do to bring that seagull back to life made that seagull the most important character for the entirety of whatever we're doing. For I don't know how many sessions it took us to get this silly seagull back to life, but it was a couple. That's all they cared about. So being able to do stuff like that, where it is underhandedly helpful, right, helps you get that reward. The reward of bringing the seagull back to life, right? You didn't get to save your dog when it got ran over as a kid, but you can save the seagull in the game, right? You can get that fake happy feeling for something that you can truly care about in a safe place, right? Because if you don't bring the seagull back, then the seagull just stays gone, right? You find a new seagull, you get a new fancy sword, whatever. There's a continued adventure past those events, and sometimes that's just as an important of a lesson is that the adventure still continues, right? Whether or not the seagull dies, the adventure still continues. It doesn't just stop at the end. Now, if all your characters die, then we do a different story. But that aside, those are kind of the positive bits of the TTRPG side of things, right? The role playing, the sitting together, and you talked about community. Finding the community in your friends or just random people that you found and brought together is extremely powerful, because sooner rather than later you will find that you relate on a plethora of levels, from spiritual to educational to whatever, right? You're gonna find something that resonates with you with everyone at the table at some point. Now, at the end of the day, do you have to like everyone who's at the table? No. Is that generally the case? Yeah, most of the time you're gonna like most people at the table. Every once in a while, you got people that just don't mesh, and that's what it is. But besides that, generally people are gonna get along and have a great time, right? So you're gonna build in those communities. You're gonna jump in those communities. And a really nice thing, just for those of you that may or may not have played before, is that these places are generally a very positive interaction, right? No matter what side of the communities you go into, you're going to find positive people that are trying to do the best of whatever they're doing, which kind of goes back into the healing process of surrounding yourself with good energy, right? We'll use that term, right? AG's used the term energy quite a bit. I'm going to piggyback off that, where if you can surround yourself with that good positive energy that will give you those rewards, that will help you get to that next step, that will be like, hey, you fell down, get back up, you got this, right? If you can find that, you're going to push through things and help yourself as much as anyone else, right? And sometimes you'll help yourself without realizing that's what you're doing. Play games, have fun, do the thing. So we got a couple minutes left, which means time for final thoughts and wrap up. So we're gonna do final thoughts first, and then we'll give you guys your promo at the end. Wahaha. So who should we start with? We're gonna start at the opposite end again. So starting with Miss Garrett.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that this conversation was really needed. I think there's so much value in finding that community to promote healing and working through the hearts, but having fun at the same time. Um, Although hard and fun don't generally mix very well, but both are extremely valuable.
Okay, Miss Parker.
Yeah, I think it's a great conversation, and I love the just the diversity of where you guys can take your characters, and being open to hearing different aspects of healing, and of the grief and the trauma and whatnot, but just the willingness to take your characters there, and to be vulnerable. I think it's amazing.
Well, fantastic. Mr. Fincher.
Hello. So what I think actually would really summarize our discussion is actually a quote from Guillermo del Toro. For those of you who don't know, he's the Mexican film director who's done a lot of stuff. He said that in order for life to begin, it has to end, and that means to see death as a beautiful thing, which is what you heard, Roger, in my podcast. And what I was really saying is that it still applies to even gaming, because if death is meant to be this beautiful end of the cycle that you're supposed to see as an opportunity to maximize as much value in the lifespan, or your soul contract, if you want to call that. Um, um, how much do you want your character or you to go through in that piece of time that they have? And really, it's a matter of asking that person, what are you doing from A to Z in your life? And what do you want that timeline to represent? Because some people think they have a predetermined life. That's nonsense. You do not have a predetermined life, because that would mean your thoughts and decisions are cemented. Not true. Everyone's decision making is very dependent on emotion and decision making that reflects how do you react to your own diagnosis and trauma. So, yeah.
Fantastic summary. Well, that leads us into our self promos. I'm going to actually start with you since you finished the summary so well. We'll just go back down the line and then I'll finish because I have stuff to talk about at the end.
Okay, so like I said, I have a book coming out, Black Rose Cocoon, which comes out late February, maybe March. Um, I guess the way I could do it, like a one log line, is 4 characters that have become a person of interest to a female killer in a city called Halberton, um, is targeting little girls because of whatever trauma that she's gone through. And we see how these city people go from being in a city to being taken away from that environment and are isolated somewhere where they thought they'd never be. Now, like I said, I'm going to take a big break of writing from that, because Project Zafutra, which is what I'm calling it because I'm not really sure on the title, um, is going to be what I call Harry Potter if Malfoy family was the center of attention, and if it was taking place on a desert. So that'll be my next project in the next year or so, and I have a bunch of other things I'm going to probably do, but that's it for now.
Fantastic. And again, where can people find you? What's your website that people can get to you at?
Right. For social media, HU Flitcher, the handle is for Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and of course, you can listen to my podcast, Life as Stories with HU Flitcher. And yeah, that should be about it.
Fantastic. Miss Parker, promo time.
Uh, yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Visit us at my website, www.adaptdna. Signature program, My Good Grief, dealing with grief, and my mental health strategies. So, yeah, join us at the website.
Fantastic. All right, Miss Garrett.
Again, podcast is called Birth Trauma Stories. We're holding space and finding the light after perinatal trauma. So you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. The website is birthtraumastories.com. And same handle at Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Thread.
Fantastic. All right, well, now it's my turn. Wahaha. You guys get to listen to me complain about the fact we got an event this weekend. I got to work tomorrow and the next day. I will be at the local Gavor Mall, and we will be causing havoc, playing games, selling stuff all weekend long. So come out, come see us there. We will be having Avatar Legends session on Monday this week. We will not be having a D&D session this week because it falls on Valentine's Day and Ash Wednesday all at the same day. So we will be skipping the gaming that night. and you guys will just have to suffer for an extra week or two without it. You can spend time with your significant others, and if you don't have significant others, watch our videos. It'll be great. But that aside, this month we have a new code. Sorry, totally forgot. It's love, LUV, all capitalized 907. Love 907. Get you 10% off at all of our discounting stuff on the website. And that's all I got. So thank you guys all very much. Stand by for the music, and we'll talk to you all soon. You guys get to hear the new song. We're gonna throw it in at the end here. Wahaha.